Should you move to Ogunquit, Maine? That's exactly what I'm going to help you figure out in today's video, so let's get into it. By the way, my name's Margaret. My dad, Michael, and I make videos to help educate you about living in the southern Maine area. So if you have any questions or you're buying or selling, feel free to reach out. All of our information is down below, as well as some free downloadable resources for you to use as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Ogunquit. This is a town of roughly 1,500 people, give or take maybe 100. It's a very, very small town on the southern Maine coast in York County. It is one of the southernmost towns in the entire state of Maine, and it is pretty well known for its beautiful beaches, its great downtown area, its great nightlife, and overall it's kind of compared to Kennebunkport as a great place to vacation or have a summer home. So if you're moving to Ogunquit, here are some things that you kind of want to consider and know about ahead of time. Now, Ogunquit is very well known in the area for having a ton of traffic. The southern Maine seacoast area really was not built for the amount of people that visit us every single year. We're talking tens of thousands of people. Now, the primary road to get kind of to and from places in the southern Maine coast is Route 1. It stretches all the way from Kittery, right when you enter the state, all the way up past Old Orchard. So it pretty much stretches the entire coast of York County. Now, this is only a one-lane road, and when tens of thousands of people visit a town with only 1,500 people, or a town that was only built for that many people too, you can imagine that the traffic gets a little bit jammed up sometimes, or a lot of the time. Ogunquit is known to have kind of a really crazy traffic pattern in the middle of the town. It's like a four-way intersection with one stop sign. It's a little bit crazy looking, and if you're not from the area, it can definitely be a little bit hectic or stressful dealing with that when you're driving down the road. Again, while this does seem maybe a little bit stressful if you're planning on moving to the area, it's really not that bad as long as you make it a point to learn the back roads and you kind of figure out how to get to and from without actually having to touch Route 1, or at least avoid it for the most part. So unless you are working in the downtown area, which pretty much would only consist of people working in the restaurant or the service industry, or people working for small boutique stores, or unless you're a lobsterman, you're not really going to have to deal with this all too much unless you're going out to eat or meeting up with friends or doing something of that nature. You pretty much can avoid Route 1 for the most part. You could take the highway to get to and from, or there's a pretty good network of back roads that run adjacent to Route 1, so you can avoid all of this. So what brings all of these people to Ogunquit? I think part of it is their great downtown area. Now, if you're moving to the area, while there is a lot of people here in the summertime, in the wintertime, now more than ever, restaurants and shops are staying open, not necessarily year-round, but they're staying open for a longer season throughout the year, and a good chunk of restaurants do actually stay open for the entire year or the majority of the year, with the exception of like a small break in the late winter or early springtime. But this phenomenal downtown area is kind of one of the reasons that all of these people come to Ogunquit. And if you're moving to the area, it's even more of an asset to you. They have some of the best restaurants in the southern Maine area. They have a phenomenal beach that, the downtown area is a 2 to 3 minute walk from the beach. You have Perkins Cove, which is right up the road as well. You have the Ogunquit Playhouse, which is maybe a quarter mile outside of that central downtown area. Again, there's tons of restaurants and shops, and while some of these are only open in the summer, a lot of them are staying open for a good chunk of the year now. And while this may not be important to you, it definitely is for a lot of people, having a great downtown area, not necessarily just like driving to an isolated restaurant, but people want to walk around and they want to stroll down to the beach after they've gone out to eat. And I think there's a lot of different benefits to having something like this in your town, and neighboring areas such as Wells don't necessarily have something like that. And so a lot of the people that actually live there are going to come to towns like Ogunquit just to enjoy their beautiful downtown, the beach, and everything that the town really has to offer. Now, if you're familiar with the area, I just kind of wanted to briefly go over Perkins Cove. That's going to be where all of the lobstermen are docked that work out of Ogunquit. There's a couple of restaurants down in that area as well, and definitely some cute little stores and candy shops, but Generally speaking, it's a little bit farther from downtown, but a lot of people like to walk marginal way to get to and from those two areas versus just walking on the road. Though people do it, there's sidewalks. It's just kind of another cute little asset to not necessarily their downtown, but the town of Ogunquit as a whole. So if you're moving to Ogunquit, you're probably going to want to know about its sense of community. Now, people who live in this town, you're not necessarily going to live in a neighborhood, and I've touched on this in a few different videos now, but southern Maine as a whole, the state of Maine as a whole, really, there's not that many people here, and there's not really a lot of traditional suburbs or neighborhoods in the state just because there's not really that many people. But even when you think of Portland, you would technically call Scarborough, the town right below Portland, a suburb of Portland, but really not a whole lot of people think of it like that. It's really its own separate area. You could technically call a lot of the towns in the area suburbs of Portland, but down in the Ogunquit area, you're kind of far enough away that you're not really dealing with too much of the city, but you definitely do have some smaller neighborhoods in the town. Southern Maine, and again, Maine as a whole, we don't really have a lot of formal neighborhoods. Now more than ever, there's a lot of new housing developments going, and so I guess you could call those, a more formal neighborhood that's been created with an HOA, and you have a lot of brand new buildings around you. You definitely have a formal neighborhood then. But just because of the nature of the land and how rural or suburban it is in the area, there's not a whole lot of those. In Ogunquit, they do have a few of those, maybe even a couple more than other neighboring towns, but you definitely have to look for them. Most houses are just on a road in Maine. In the area that we are located in, you don't necessarily live in a formal neighborhood, though some do. It's more or less just like you're driving down the road and there's houses, but it's not really something that you would walk or your kids would bike through the area. But Ogunquit does have a couple of those, and they're definitely an asset to the town. So if you're moving to the area, it definitely helps to know where those are, especially if you have kids, as that could be really important to you, obviously. As for the school system, students living in the Ogunquit area are going to go to the Wells Ogunquit Community School District. That would basically be the Wells school system. Now in Maine, there's not as many schools as I think there are in neighboring states such as Massachusetts. I know that a lot of my family members and cousins, they've always told me that there's multiple different high schools in the area of where they live. In this particular area, if you live in Wells, you're more than likely going to the Wells High School. There are exceptions to this, obviously. But generally speaking, if you live in Wells, you go to the Wells High School. If you live in York, you go to the York High School or middle school, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a couple of elementary schools in certain towns, but for Wells, there's just the Wells Elementary, Middle, and High School, and Wells shares their school system with Ogunquit. So if you're living in Ogunquit, a lot of those students and a lot of those families find their sense of community in Wells as well. Now, people who live in the area, it's well known that Wells and Ogunquit are two completely separate towns, but definitely if you grow up living in that area, because we share a high school and a whole school system with the kids in Ogunquit, it very much feels like the same community, even though they're two separate towns. Wells is a town of roughly 11,000 people. Ogunquit's only 1,500, so they kind of get grouped together a lot of the time. Now, if you don't have kids that are going to this school system and you just live in Ogunquit, you might not feel that same sense of community with Wells like you do if you have young kids growing up in the area, but generally speaking, a lot of people do kind of group those two towns together as far as the school system goes, at least. So we've gone over, how many people are in Ogunquit, the traffic, which is, a huge thing that people talk about when they think of Ogunquit. We've talked about downtown, your sense of community, your school district, but how about real estate prices? Because obviously that is a huge factor when you're moving to any particular area. Ogunquit is an expensive town to live in. While the property taxes, all things considered, in this area are pretty low, to buy a property in Ogunquit is pretty expensive. A lot of the properties are upwards of $1 million. As far as geography goes, it's really not a big town. And there's not a lot of people there, but there certainly is plenty of real estate and it certainly is not cheap. If you're looking at Ogunquit as an investment area, or you're looking at Ogunquit for an investment property, this would be a great area. It's a very sought after place to live and a very, very sought after place to vacation and have summer homes. So as far as an investment's concerned, Ogunquit could definitely be a great option for you. If you're looking to raise your family in the area and you have the money to buy an Ogunquit, it is a beautiful place to live. There are certainly cheaper towns in and around the area to buy into that are still, driving distance to the downtown area. But if you have the money and you love the area, it certainly is a great place to live. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is how far you are to amenities in Ogunquit. Now, Ogunquit does not have a grocery store. They have a couple of small little markets, but there's not, a big commercial grocery store. There is no gas stations in Ogunquit. Granted, this is a very small town. So your closest grocery store and gas station are all of, 10, 15 minutes away if you're in the center of town. So these things really aren't that far, but it's important to note that you don't have a drugstore, you don't have a grocery store, a gas station, and a lot of other important amenities that you would kind of need in everyday life. Now, again, they're driving distance. They're within a few minutes just over the border into Wells or Ogunquit or the Berwicks, but it's important to note. And if you are starting to run out of gas, get it before you head into town because you will be out of luck. All in all, Ogunquit is a great place to live. It's a small community. It's a very safe community, and it has some of the best views in the entire state of Maine, in my opinion, especially on Marginal Way. It's definitely worth checking out. Now, if you want to move to Ogunquit, but it's a little bit out of your price range, or you don't really want to be that close to all of that traffic, there's definitely places that you can look in neighboring towns that are a quick drive to the beach or the downtown area, and they'll be a lot more affordable as well. But even if you are not buying real estate directly in this town, you can certainly find, a great sense of community here. You will love visiting the downtown area and the beach and just everything that the town has to offer. There is a reason why tens of thousands of people visit this area every year, and why people from neighboring towns choose to come to Ogunquit instead of staying where they are, because the overall experience of being there is just great. All right, so I hope you found this video helpful. And again, my name's Margaret. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. All of our information is down below, and we'll see you next time.